We are joined now by our buddy Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin. Lots to dive into with him. Appreciate him, as always, hopping on the show with us. And let's start right here off the top, Senator. A lot of discussion that the so-called Big Beautiful Bill will be done by Memorial Day. What can you tell us about the progress? What do you like? What do you not like about the bill so far?
Hello, guys. Well, I hate to be the skunk in the room. Let me give you some numbers. 2019, we spent $4.4 trillion. This year, we'll spend a little over $7 trillion. That's a 58% increase. Over the next 10 years, CBO estimates we will spend a whopping $89.3 trillion and grow our debt by almost $22 trillion. So what the House is working on right now is a spending reduction. It sounds big, of $1.5 trillion, but you compare that to 89.3, that's 1.68% reduction. 1.5 trillion versus 89.3 trillion. And by the way normally these spending reductions occur, they occur in the out years when there's the probability that they'll never be actually realized. Now, in more serious times, during World War II, spending increased 578%, okay? 10 times that amount, but within 7 years, the start of World War II, we were back down to a lower spending level as a percentage of GDP. It had been, I think, 11.7%, went down to 11.4% because they realized this is a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence. It was extraordinary. We had to increase spending for World War II, but then we came back down to a pre-war spending level. What happened in the federal government is we went from 4.4 to 6.5, and we've never looked back. I don't know of a family who would, if they had an illness and they had to borrow $50,000 to pay for medical bills, if that family member got well, they would keep borrowing $50,000 and spend at that level. That's exactly what the federal government's doing. So again, we have to return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level. I've been in the White House now twice with the Finance Committee, the Budget Committee. It seemed like President Trump was on board with that. Plus, not only return to a reasonable pre-pandemic level, which kind of the top figure there is about 6.5 trillion versus the 7 trillion we're spending right now, but also have a process to achieve and maintain it. And by the way, Elon Musk has shown us how to do it. Line by line, contract by contract. You have to take the time and do the work. So I've always been in favor of a multi-step process, provide the border funding, the defense funding. By the way, in the Senate bill, we would have reduced spending by $850 billion, more than half what the House is trying to achieve right now, just in that first reconciliation bill. Then come back, step two, make sure that we take an automatic massive tax increase off the table, just extend current tax law. We could have already had that done. But now we're in this, then we could be working on the big old complex, messy negotiations in terms of getting spending down and also fulfill President Trump's promises. And things like no tax on, I would say, cash tips would be a pretty good thing to do. But again, we're involved in this great big bill. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And right now, there's enough senators, I can tell you, that's not going to pass if that's all the spending reduction we're going to realize.
All right, Senator Johnson, appreciate you being with us and that detailed assessment of what is in the big, beautiful bill. How much of the cuts, I'm trying to remember the numbers offhand here. You said we're at a $7 trillion spending. Pre-pandemic would be $6.5 trillion. So that's a $500 billion gap or differential that we have to address here. What would be the cuts that would make up that $500 billion? Is a lot of this or any of this driven by the Doge recommendations? And why? Sorry, a lot of questions here, Senator. And why aren't other Republicans going along with this? What's happening here?
Well, let me tell you what I'm scratching my head about. So Elon Musk, by the way, brilliant. Doge, what Trump and Elon did with Doge was brilliant. They've exposed all this waste, fraud, and abuse. But by the way, they've also exposed how clueless and oblivious we all are in terms of waste, fraud, and abuse. So they've shown how to do it. The problem is we're not codifying it. The way you codify the discretionary side of what Doge finds is through rescission packages. Anything they find on the mandatory side, that ought to be loaded into reconciliation. I'm not aware of any recommendations of Doge savings through reconciliation, through other mandatory spending. And in terms of rescissions, we've been hearing about a drum roll here, underwhelming $9 billion. Now, Elon's been saying they've been uncovering about $4.5 billion a day. They're ahead of pace because he said about $1 trillion, by the end of the fiscal year. So they've been in office 100 days, 4.5 billion. That's $450 billion, and they're talking about a rescission package of an underwhelming $9 billion, which apparently is being held up because there's resistance here in the House and the Senate. I mean, go figure. So again, unfortunately, we have big spenders in our party, and listen, I ran in 2010 because we were mortgaging our children's future. We were $14 trillion in debt. Now we're $37 trillion in debt. And again, what we're talking about is adding another $20 trillion to that debt, even if we pass a big, beautiful bill. Again, and let me add, as I do the math, this one big, beautiful bill would actually increase the deficit. It wouldn't decrease it. It would actually increase the deficit.
But where are the spending cuts? Can I just you got to remember for a lot of us, I know you're looking at this.
It's literally across the board. Listen, we absolutely need to reform Medicaid, and we've been talking to people. You can squeeze probably $1 trillion out of Medicaid without touching benefits. Actually, make Medicaid more secure for disabled children by putting work requirements on the able-bodied that are being covered through Obamacare. Remember, Medicaid, the out-of-control nature of Medicaid is Obamacare. Where states are gaming the system, where they're doing these provider taxes, which is just a total financial scam. The states say, hey, give us $200, and then we'll go to the federal government. They'll give us $180 for that $200, and we'll come back and give you $200 back. What a scam. What a chump the federal government is. So Medicaid, probably at least $1 trillion. But again, you go line by line through 2,400 lines of $7,000 billion. Again, Elon Musk is showing it. He's just scraping the surface, the tip of the iceberg. You have to do the work. We're not willing to do the work. Listen, I wrote the column in the Wall Street Journal. We need a budget review panel. Senators, House members, members of OMB. They don't want to do it. They don't want to do the work. They want to slam this thing together, take a look at a couple things like Medicaid. Everything else is saying, can't touch that, can't touch that, can't touch that. So they're not looking at all the detail. They're not looking at the literally hundreds of billions of dollars that if you didn't spend it, I don't think anybody would even know it, but you have to do the work. And I really can't give you the full answer then, other than isn't it obvious, based on what Elon's already found, scratching the surface, that we ought to be able to find hundreds of billions. Again, when you're spending $4,400 billion in 2019, now we're spending $7,000 billion. Again, I got to believe it. Now, if it's not there, I'll roll over and say, okay, that's as good as we can do, but we have to go line by line through thousands of lines of budgetary process. We have to do the work.
We're talking to Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. I agree with everything you said. And a lot of the people listening to us right now agree with everything you said. And one of the criticisms we get, and I'm sure you hear it too, is if Democrats want to spend $8 trillion and Republicans are willing to spend $7 trillion, let's just say, what are we really voting on here? How much difference, this is the argument, right? The swamp, how much difference is really being made if we're just talking about gradations of how much debt we're going to undertake?
Well, again, what we're looking at right now in the bill is a 1.6% reduction over 10 years. Take $89.3 trillion down to a little under $88 trillion. Again, it's not even a rounding error. I mean, that's how insignificant it really is. And so basically what we're talking about is we're basically codifying all of the Biden spending, all of the Biden COVID spending. I really don't think people that voted for President Trump thought he would continue to spend at Biden's levels. So again, I'll keep going back to the numbers because they are just jaw-dropping. $4.4 to $7 trillion, 58% increase. And all we can do is drop it by 1.5%. It's pathetic. It's pathetic.
What happens if we don't do the work, as you've been saying? What happens if we just say, you know what? No one has the will. American people aren't paying close enough attention. Let's just keep on rolling this train down the road. What do you see in the future?
Well, again, what I've been trying to convince the president of and leadership is let's go back to the multiple step approach, get the border funding, get defense funding, pocket about $850 billion of savings. I think the House has found at least that. Let's pocket that. Then just extend current tax law, take that off the table. That would put us in pretty good shape. That returns an awful lot of certainty to the economy. But bottom line, guys, I mean, if we're not willing to reduce spending to a reasonable pre-pandemic level, and we still have deficits of 1.7, 1.8, $2 trillion, some point in time, I guess we're going to have to pay for those and maybe have to let tax rates increase. I think that's a terrible idea. I don't want to do it. I don't need anything in return. I wouldn't bargain anything. It'd be a 1 cent bill, just extend current tax law because if we would have been smart enough back in 2017, if we would have had Chairman Crapo who said, hey, guys, let's use current policy. There's no score there. This can all be permanent. It doesn't have to automatically expire. But we weren't smart. That was a blunder. It was a huge blunder. So if we could have done it back then, we would have. So I don't want to score. I just want to extend current tax law, as awful as it is, get that done, and then we could take the time to go line by line. We could also be much more thoughtful in terms of the tax system. I would love to simplify and rationalize our tax system while we are providing the type of relief to working men and women that President Trump campaigned on. I'd love to do that. We won't get that done in 2 weeks. We won't get that done by July 4th. We'll end up with a really ugly bill that actually increases the deficit, and we blow our one opportunity. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reset federal spending that has been exploded by Democrats. The initial pandemic spending, that was bipartisan, but we should have returned to pre-pandemic spending back in 2021, 2022. We haven't done it.
Thank you for coming on, making this case. I agree with everything Senator Ron Johnson just said. If people agree with you, what would you ask them to do that are listening to us right now?
Call their House members, call their senators, call the White House. Tell them spending is a problem. I've got a great video on my X page that everybody's saying, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. From the president on down, send that to them. Take a look at that video. It runs about 1:30. That's what we told our supporters. We don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. The final question is, so are we willing to fix it? Right now, it doesn't look like we are.
Thank you for coming on, making the case. We will share that. And in the meantime, best of luck as we move through this process.
Have a great day.
That's Senator Ron Johnson. I agree with everything he said. I think that going back to the baseline pre-COVID budget makes a ton of sense. And you and I agree that this $37 trillion budget deficit at some point has to be addressed. We're sort of living in a magical world where we pretend that that deficit isn't real. And if you look at what Social Security, if you look at what Medicare, Medicaid, and interest is eating up on the budget, there's just not that much outside of that arena that can be cut that is going to get us back to a balanced budget. I think it's like 86% of the budget is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and now interest on the national debt. By the way, interest would be helped a bit if we could get the Fed in action to start cutting interest rates. And Trump was right when he wanted to lock in. Remember, he asked an interesting question. I never heard anybody really answer it, but he's like, hey, can we lock in the interest rate as a country? Back in COVID days, we should have done that. Mother's Day, day for happy celebrations. One of the best gifts you can give any mom, the kind that evokes the best memories and good feelings. Legacy Box service is perfect for this. For more than a decade now, they've been digitizing pictures, videos, Super 8 film reels, 15 other media types. If it has pictures on it, moves, they want to digitize it, not just for moms, but for everybody out there all year round. When you digitize those memories, you preserve them forever, make them really easy to rewatch and revisit. And Legacy Box, trusted by over 1.5 million families, including our own. Once you and mom send them those tapes, film, and photos, they transfer all those memories onto digital files and return your tapes and film plus brand new digital files. It makes a great gift for mom. We both relied on Legacy Box to do it for our families. They do amazing work. They're based in my mom's hometown of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And when you get back to the way family memories and entertainment lasting forever, it's priceless. Go to legacybox.com/Clay right now for the best Mother's Day sale ever. 60% off the regular prices. That's legacybox.com/clay for 60% off. legacybox.com/clay, 60% off.